What's happening, everyone? I'm your host, Too Elusive, and today we're going to spend the next 4 videos talking about a fan favorite. Everyone knows who Megaman is. He was Capcom's main star back in the NES days, offering a unique gameplay style to a lot of side-scrollers back then, even if those games were known for putting your face in the dirt a number of times. When the SNES came about, Capcom of course wanted to capitalize on the new hardware and naturally wanted to bring their icon over to the platform too. However, they didn't just want a repeat of the same character they've been using on the 8-bit console. If they're going to bring Mega Man onto the upgraded system, he too should receive a plethora of upgrades of his own and set a completely different tone than what the classic series had offered without sacrificing that core gameplay. This is how we got Mega Man X. X from the start has a number of things going from it aside from that awesome intro we just heard. It is the first game within the Mega Man franchise to begin with an intro stage while at the same time setting a darker tone for the series unlike its classic self. See, X takes place 100 years into the future where robots and humans are supposed to coexist with each other, those robots being called Reploids. By the way, those same Reploids were mass produced by Dr. Kane, with each of them following a design that is based off of X himself due to the fact that he is a highly advanced robot that no one's ever seen before. But later on down the road, those Reploids started attacking humans, which earned them that Maverick label, and the Maverick Hunters were formed in order to keep them in line. Sigma was the original leader of the Maverick Hunters, but at some point he also became a Maverick and rallied other Maverick Hunters to join him in order to wage war against the humans. Since X and Zero are pretty much the only Reploids who are capable of taking on his whole squad, 2 of them set out to stop Sigma before all of humanity will eventually be wiped out. Now I'm gonna be honest with you, when I first played this game back when I was a kid, the only Mega Man I was familiar with at the time was from the 90s cartoon that aired back then, and I thought that X was the robot clad in white armor, going strictly off of the box art here. I also hadn't seen that episode where both of them worked together at one point. So during this intro stage, I thought I was playing as Mega Man from the TV show the whole time, and I would get to play as X once the intro stage was over. But I eventually figured it out when I noticed the X icon sitting right under his health, plus Zero will address him as X later on. Look, I was only a kid and I didn't know any better, but I understand why it was done this way. The whole purpose of this intro stage is to introduce classic players into the game and show them the ropes without overloading the players with all the new stuff they could expect. Like classic, X will start off with a chargeable buster, and he does come with a useful ability to scale walls by jumping off of them, which is a huge welcome to these games. Look, if that was classic, I definitely would have missed that jump entirely. However, X's health is noticeably small compared to classic, who usually packs a lot of health from the jump, and the absence of his sliding ability is a little foreboding. Did Capcom take a few steps back here? Still, the intro stage does a fantastic job laying out that groundwork without bogging you down with too many tutorials and telling you what to do, just letting you figure things out on your own as you're going along. This is how you make a good can opener to a new series, and including such a memorable music piece further adds to the good impression we're getting already. Once we reach the end, we play an unfair game of Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and after royally getting our metallic butt handed to us, we get saved by one of the coldest characters we've seen in video game history. You know that one dude you see in a lot of animes, movies, and other games where he's not the main character at all, but he steals the show every time he appears? Yeah. It's this guy. Zero, who is the name of our show stealer, not only looks cooler than you, but he is also the reason why we get to live and fight another day. However, without fully giving it away, Zero does leave us with a clue telling us that if we use all the abilities X was designed with, we may become just as powerful as he is, implying that this game has more underneath the hood than what's being shown on the surface. So now we hit that stage select screen, the first X keeping the tradition of letting players have an open-ended method on how they want to approach this game. However, X has a special rule in this case. No matter what, you absolutely need to start with Chill Penguin if you want to get the full experience out of this game. Younger me knew nothing about this rule, but I started with Chill Penguin anyway, simply because out of all the Mavericks here, he looks the least intimidating, and looking back at it, I feel like that was by design. Our only other options was a literal bird of prey, someone who can easily pass off as an assassin, and everyone knows when you're trying to pick a fight with someone, never go for the homeboy who is well above your weight class, especially if that homeboy can box. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the robotic bird that can't fly. Now Chill Penguin is pretty straightforward at first, testing your wall climbing and dodging abilities here and there, but once you reach the middle of the stage, you'll come across one of Light's capsules just sitting out in the open. The good doc will have a conversation about why you're even here, you'll hop into that sucker, and then it was right here everything began to click all at once, and this is what Zero was talking about when he mentioned we may become just as strong as he is. Getting stronger is more than just defeating the Mavericks and collecting their weapons this time around. In 3 other stages, there are more capsules like this one that will contain a piece of X's armor and give X a new ability. By the time he collects all 4, he will not only look exactly as he appears on the box art, but he'll also become a much stronger character as a result. The chest piece allows X to take less damage, while the helmet protects him from falling objects. His mobility will increase dramatically, and you'll be able to experience the fast-paced action this game is supposed to have thanks to his new kicks. Finally, he'll be able to charge up his buster to 3 stages while also gaining charge variants to the Maverick weapons, something we didn't see in any of the Mega Man games until now. Best part is, you don't need to wait until you have all the armor pieces before you can use their abilities. The moment you get them, you're able to use them right away. But the armor is not the only thing the player should look out for. Additionally, there are 4 hidden sub-tanks that will fill up every time you collect life energy when your health is full. They work exactly the same as E-tanks, but unlike the former, these sub-tanks won't go away when they're used. They just need to be refilled again, which means you don't need to stock up on E-tanks anymore. Just be mindful that if you use them at all, it will consume the entire tank, even if all you took was a slap on the wrist. Finally, we have the heart tanks. In each of these Maverick stages, you can find these heart-looking items that will increase X's health once you pick them up. So while X does start off with a small health pool, he'll end up with as much health as the Mavericks by the time you reach the end of the game if you've been actively seeking them out. Looking for these power-ups and seeing X progressively reach his full potential adds a bit of an RPG mechanic to this game, and aside from the faster paced action the X series provides, I always enjoy going through the process of turning X into a mobile force of destruction despite X having the personality of a pacifist. The Maverick weapons themselves are also a pretty solid lineup, either because of their overall practical use like the Storm Tornado, which should honestly be renamed to everything in that direction because of how destructive this weapon really is, or it could be because their charge variants provide an excellent utility behind them, like the rolling shield protecting X from small enemies and projectiles, or how the chameleon sting outright makes X invincible for a short period, which is very good for skipping past a lot of enemies and hazards alike. It definitely presents another rewarding experience where if you experiment and play around with each of these weapons, the more you're going to be able to cheese out certain sections of the game and overall make your run a lot more efficient than just relying on the buster the whole time. And if the boss weapons are actually just as effective as your buster even when it's upgraded, that is when I can say you have a solid spread here. There are 2 more upgrades I should bring up, even though these are more secretive. You can pick up that arm upgrade from Zero if you happen to make it all the way through Palace Stage 3 and defeat Vile without having the Spiral Crush buster from the Light capsule. Zero will give you his buster right before he bites the dust, and it functions exactly the same as the Spiral Crush. So if you found it difficult to get the actual buster from the capsule, which is understandable honestly, this is a nice alternative. Just make sure you have the homing torpedo during the platforming section of Palace Stage 1. Trust me, it's going to save you from a headache. The other upgrade would have to be the Hadoken, the same signature projectile Ryu from Street Fighter is known for using. Getting this sucker will let you one-shot almost everything in the entire game, including Sigma himself, as long as you're at full health, but it doesn't do squat against his final form. I did say almost. Still, it's really amusing to obliterate him and his Warhound right after he's done talking so much smack in the beginning. X even says the Hadouken line every time you do it. Fun fact, that is Ryu's voice clip taken straight from Street Fighter 2. They just sped it up here. While getting that Hadouken is sorta finicky, I can promise you it's worth the trouble. All you need to do is get every single upgrade and boss weapon in the game. That's the easy part. The hard part is making it all the way to the end of Armored Armadillo stage and jumping off the minecart once you've reached that large chasm and collect the life energy sitting right above his room. Then you gotta repeat that process about 3 more times. The next time you're up there, the light capsule will show up and reward you with this move. To this day, I still have to wonder how players were able to discover this secret back then, considering how cryptic it is to unlock it in the first place. Now on to the stages themselves. The stage designs in X1 are all pretty solid in my book. Each of them will uphold the tradition of matching the theme represented by the Maverick, complete with a set of hazards that will test your mastery of the game. The power plant will have several lightning traps to avoid while the power will constantly go out. Meanwhile, the factory will have you dancing with fire pillars while you're trying to avoid taking a bath in the lava below. However, the very first X has a very unique mechanic within its stage design. If you manage to defeat certain Mavericks before tackling another stage, that following stage could be altered in some way. For example, if you were to take out Storm Eagle before paying Spark Mandrill a visit, his air fortress will crash right into the power plant and eliminate all of these electric traps while also weakening the mini-boss. The same thing also happens in Flame Mammoth stage if you were to take out Chill Penguin first before visiting him, as his factory is now frozen over. There will be no more flame pillars and you can walk right over the frozen lava on top of that. This is a unique mechanic that is only done well in the first X, and it has been one of my favorite mechanics I've seen in a Mega Man title. But it's also not the only time we will see it being used. We will see it return in the future, but not for a while. But aside from that, even with the mechanic that I brought up earlier, the stages themselves are well balanced in terms of their difficulty and overall layout. None of them will overwhelm you with annoying gimmicks and will allow you to enjoy the full extent of X's capabilities without getting in the way, which is exactly how these stages should function. Plus, it also helps that X has nothing but absolute bangers playing while you're doing some serious Maverick hunting. Now you might have noticed I didn't play Storm Eagle's arguably the best track in the game, and I would agree if you said that only Mavericks would completely omit his theme. But I promise you, I have a reason for doing that. My only real complaint is how often the game requires you to climb walls, something you see extremely often during the palace stages. I wouldn't have too much of an issue with it if it weren't for the fact that wall dash jumping didn't have such a stiff input in order to pull it off. Unlike the later X games and by extension the Mega Man Zero titles where you simply need to hold down the dash button in order to perform this action, you need to hit both the dash and your jump button at the same time in order to kick off of the walls with higher momentum. It's very helpful when avoiding attacks from bosses and scaling wide corridors where enemies are all over the place, but it just feels really awkward to input this technique all the time. It definitely led to a lot of moments where I took damage during boss fights simply because I couldn't get the input right, and it even costed me a few lives. Speaking of these bosses, now is a good time to break them down. The fights against the main Mavericks as well as the palace encounters can go one of two ways. If you battle them without their weapons, I say a handful of them will provide you with a good challenge. Some of these bosses are very easy to take down even without their weaknesses like Flame Mammoth and Chill Penguin. But then you have others like Boomer Quagger, who is an absolute blast to fight against if you're not exploiting his weakness. Fighting him is like a test of your speed, agility, and reaction time, as this guy will teleport several times before he either throws his projectile or he outright tries to command grab you for a decent chunk of damage.
Gotcha, bitch!
Sure, you can stagger him with your buster, but then he'll mix up his approach with his teleporting in order to open you up and force a mistake. He's my favorite Maverick to fight against out of everyone here for this reason. But then when you start using their weapons, most of them will drop like flies, especially when the Spark Mandrill syndrome kicks in. If you ever wonder why it was coined in this game, it's because Spark in particular suffers the most, since you can loop his stun to the point where he can't do anything to you with proper timing. Although I argue that Sting has the funnier loop compared to Spark, and it's much easier to pull off without the threat of getting bopped in the face. But what's even more interesting is that some of the bosses have unique interactions with other weapon types. Flame Mammoth and Launch Octopus will have their fight patterns altered if you chop the trunk off or their tentacles with the boomerang weapon. Though I feel like Launch Octopus becomes a bit more difficult when that happens, since he'll bombard you with missiles without any pause. Still, the point stands. If you want a more challenging fight, don't use a weapons or the Hadoken for that matter. If you want to rip through everyone like a wet tissue on the other hand, feel free to use them as you please. As far as flaws go, the first X really doesn't have too many, aside from the glaring issue that you need to visit Chill Penguin in order to unlock the full extent of the game, and the wall dash jumping feeling awkward to use. Granted, you can beat the entire game without dashing, but at that point you're just playing classic without the sliding ability. Not only that, but the enemies respawn very quickly the moment you scroll a mere pixel away from their spawn point. Great for farming energy drops, but horrible when you're dealing with a swarm. The first X, for what it is, however, is a solid entry that aged like fine wine and is still highly played by its fans for this reason. While I personally wouldn't call it the absolute best entry, as that belongs to another X game entirely, it is indeed one of the best games that ever came out, and I never get tired of playing it. Now, I normally end it here, but if you were to hover your mouse over the player or activate the player's HUD on whichever platform you're watching this on, you will see that we still got a whole chunk of video left. That's because Capcom graced us with a remake of the first game on the PSP known as Maverick Hunter X, and since I'm talking about the first X already, I may as well bring it up here. Maverick Hunter X is basically the first game, but now it's rocking those visuals similar to Megaman X8. For one, I dig this updated look as it allowed us to see the full extent of what the stage environments would look like if it were not limited to the SNES hardware. While the game will play almost exactly the same, there are a few changes from the original. For one, you actually have to give Vile the hands this time on the first stage. While the light capsules are still found in the same 4 stages between Chill Penguin, Flame Mammoth, Storm Eagle, and Stain Chameleon, the armors in each capsule have been swapped around, plus the boots in particular are not out in the open anymore, which I did find to be an odd choice here due to how important your dash ability really is. But at the same time, they're not really all that hard to find as long as you pay attention to your surroundings. The Z Buster you get from Zero will now have an actual purpose. Not only the charge shot has the same visual as Zero's Buster, it also does more damage to bosses. So you now have a reason to pick up Zero's Buster instead of going for the Spiral Crush. Both of X's defensive weapons, the Chameleon Sting and the Rolling Shield, will now let you attack and switch to other weapons when their charge variants are active. This also means you can just reapply Sting's invincibility the moment it wears off. The Mavericks and the Palace bosses have been revamped a little bit, as some of them have altered attack patterns than how they were in the original. They've also been noticeably toned down as they seem a bit slower than how they normally would have been, a change that I can't really say I agree with. Except for the spider. I'm glad that annoying Arachnid became slower with this new update. Hard mode does make them faster, and in some cases it may give them an additional move, but I still say they're very easy to take down. This also includes the mini bosses who used to be HP sponges in the original, but not anymore. Remember that green armored guy who was guarding the light capsule and how it would take 10 years to defeat him? Well, this is how he is in X Maverick Hunter. Honestly, I don't mind this at all. Many bosses like him should not be rocking that much HP in the first place. The Sigma Palace stages have been completely rearranged, and the rematches with the Mavericks are now in a different order. Plus, when you fight them here, the boss theme is replaced with the Sigma Palace variant instead. Finally, the Hadoken has been buffed. Getting it only requires you to reach at life energy with every upgrade and boss weapon without getting hit once, and the Hadoken can now one-shot everyone in the game, including Sigma's wolf form. Oh right, Your weapons automatically will refill themselves if you were to die instead of just leaving you high and dry with what you've used already. These changes aside, Maverick Hunter will feel exactly the same from a gameplay standpoint, even right down to that clunky wall dash jumping, which honestly feels even worse here. Why they decided to keep the old inputs instead of using the new, more improved ones is something I'll never figure out. Speaking of keeping features in here that should have stayed in the past, the enemies can still respawn just as badly as they did in the original, so all the problems we had with that fiasco is being replicated here. Additionally, the story has been fleshed out more. X and the Mavericks will share some voice dialogue before they scrap, giving us further insight on the characters.
If you've made it all the way up here, you must not be an ordinary B-class hunter.
Kuwanger, I don't want to fight an old friend like you.
You don't want to fight? Well, isn't this interesting? You're a Maverick Hunter, and Maverick Hunters are Reploids designed for fighting.
So I'll have to fight you no matter what, huh?
Of course. A chance for a fight this fun doesn't come along every day. I'll see if you're operating up to spec.
But if you're really into the lore stuff, you're gonna want to hit up the Day of Sigma. This is a cinematic that you'll unlock right after you beat the game, and it's basically a prequel of the X series. It's honestly a great watch if you want to get a good idea on how all these characters are like before everything hits the fan and all hell breaks loose. Naturally, the soundtrack was going to get an update to match the current visuals, and considering how the music in the original would fall under the rock genre, remixing them without the SNES limitations should have been an easy transition, except it wasn't. A lot of the melodies from the original ended up getting buried under a bunch of additional techno sounds or heavy metal guitar riffs that doesn't quite enhance the song at all. But I also feel like this subject is going to vary from person to person. You're either going to like the remixes or not favor them all that much. A very good example of this is how Storm Eagle stage turned out. See, I told you I had a purpose for this song. When you heard this in the original, the beginning of the song started off with a guitar riff, and you can tell that that's how they wanted to open up, but once again, SNES limitations are a thing. Still, despite those holding the song back a little bit, it is still an absolute banger and a great way to start it off because it immediately sets the tone for how the rest of the melody is going to play out. This also matches Storm Eagle's personality to a T. Noble and fierce is what he is, and there's a reason why a lot of people hail this as one of the best tracks in the entire game. And then we have the Maverick Hunter version where it sounds like a battle is taking place in space instead of an airport. All the techno vibes it's giving off doesn't match the atmosphere it was trying to set up, and it feels out of place, which is a common problem with the music in Maverick Hunter. These aren't the worst remixes I've heard by any means, but they just don't hold a candle to the original. Now, once you've beat the game with X, you're gonna unlock a whole new mode where you're able to play as Vile, the X Maverick Hunter. And we're not just talking about a couple stages here and there. Oh no, they're letting you play the entire game from start to finish with him this time.
Sorry to burst your bubble, but I'm the one that's gonna change the world.
So here's the scoop with Vile. Unlike X, he can't dash at all, and he doesn't copy boss weapons either. Instead, homie takes the corpses of his defeated enemies and turns them into a new set of weapons that he can add to his arsenal, which is very fitting for a character like him. You start off with only 3 weapon types, being his Vulcan, his shoulder blaster, and a grenade that can be launched from his leg. But as you defeat more Mavericks, Vile will progressively unlock the rest of his arsenal, including missiles, rocket punches, lasers, cutters, rolling plasmas, and flamethrowers. Each of these weapons will come with a cost when selecting them, and you'll get the opportunity to customize them before you go into battle. Now that I think about it, Vile is basically a custom robo that is hell bent on destroying X. Vile can also stumble across his powerful ride armor, but it will constantly drain energy the moment he steps in. If the ride armor is damaged, that energy is going to be drained even faster. But if you find any weapon energy, you can extend the timer on your ride armor. A lot of the times the ride armor is mostly there to to solve some kind of puzzle leading to a power-up or outright cause some destruction. But honestly, I would have preferred if we could just use the whole thing without a timer to begin with. As you are playing the guy, each of his weapons will consume energy, but it will refill on its own. This is kind of a double-edged sword because while he can spam some really powerful weapons with his loadout, he'll become a sitting duck depending on which ones you're using, especially if it involves his leg weapon, as it will leave him wide open. That is why it is best to use Vile's leg projectiles from the air, as you'll have less recovery time and you can even use it to stall his landing, which does come in handy in certain situations. But let me tell you, while the stage layout is the same, the enemy placement for Vile is completely different from X, and it's far more dickish. Very often, Vile will be attacked in swarms rather than gradually facing a few of them at a time. This is even worse if you need to backpedal just a bit to get better positioning, only for those same enemies to respawn behind you and now you're under siege from both ends. Furthermore, some of Vile's power-ups are relocated in some of the most god-awful areas and you need to put in more effort to get to them, especially the E-Tank located in Storm Eagle stage. Most players skip this power-up entirely and I honestly don't blame them for it. And while I don't mind hearing Vile's theme, this was a missed opportunity to remix a soundtrack to match Vile's playstyle. But Capcom was like, nah, we're just gonna play Vile's theme on loop and call it a day. Vile is gonna provide a lot of frustrating moments. However, his multi-weapon style gameplay adds a fresh new take on the series, and he's admittedly fun to play despite the amount of times I wanted to bang my head against the wall. But I will say this, Vile also has one of the best final encounters we'll see throughout the X series, since he ends his campaign with a battle against both X and Zero. That is the textbook definition of ending your campaign on a high note. With that being said, here's some advice when you're playing him. Go after the birds first. Storm Eagle is going to give him a movement speed increase, while Chill Penguin will give him an armor upgrade. Where you go from there is going to be entirely up to you. But word to the wise, if you go after Storm Eagle first, make sure you do not get hit by his dive attacks. That dive attack is going to tear through Vile like butter, and trust me, you don't want to be on the receiving end of that. Issues aside, Maverick Hunter X is a solid remake for what it is. That's why it pains me to say that we were supposed to get more remakes in this format for X2 all the way up to X6, but we all know how Capcom operates. Money talks, and Maverick Hunter was not doing a lot of talking for them at the time, so they all got canned. I especially would have loved to see how they would have handled X4 as well as the issues for X6, but what can you do? One can only dream from there. Anyway, I say this video has gone long enough. If you made it all the way to the end, you are all definitely A-class Maverick Hunters here. Of course, if you want to be an S-class Maverick Hunter, hitting that subscribe button while giving this video a like will bump you up to that S rank easily. And if you're already a subscriber in that case, you already got that S-class status from the jump. Alright, that's enough buttering you guys up and I hope that it worked. Anyway, I'll see y'all in the next one. Later!